Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Just taking a deep breath. I wanted to start by saying I haven't been giving papers, certainly in quite a long time, but certainly last week I was at Howard University delivering one on an entirely different subject. So it looks like I'm getting some more practice. But so let me thank Dr. Evans. I mean, really, I have goosebumps right now because I've actually realized something in the process of explicating the it's not the Negro and the artisan, but the criteria of Negro art, which really took me down an entirely different road that turns out to be very tied to the murals that we have here at Clark Atlanta. And while I've always been, giving towards and explicating them on one level, it actually, this entire treatise, this whole exploration reflects that it really has its roots in a discourse that occurred during the Harlem Renaissance among several of our race leaders. So, without any further ado, I was very stressed by the task. I'm like, well, how am I going to deal with this? But I accepted it, and I'm really glad that I did. It was a keynote address that Du Bois gave in 1926 on the occasion when Carter G. Woodson became the 12th recipient of the prestigious Spingarn Award. And so I begin with this provocative quote. All art is propaganda, and ever must be, despite the wailing of the purists. I stand in utter shamelessness and say that whatever art I have for writing has been used always for propaganda, for gaining the right of black folks to love and enjoy. I don't give a damn for any art that is not used for propaganda. But I do care that propaganda is confined to one side while the other is stripped and silent. Thus, all art is propaganda and ever must be. In reviewing this speech, this statement, among other declarative positions, echoed as a subject that remains central in the contemporary visual art discourse among artists of color today, not to mention its relevance to the founding of this institution's permanent collection and the art of the Negro murals. However, given the window of time allotted in my discussion, we'll focus on a few salient points that Du Bois makes in this address. In hindsight of 3 generations, Du Bois' seminal treatise makes apparent there remains a codependency, a symbiotic relationship between black artists and the visual art power brokers, most of whom are white, if for no other reason that they remain the largest segment with disposable income. Some of the images included in this presentation, which I'm realizing I may not get to because, you said 15 minutes or 10 minutes, and I see I have to really drive at a very fast speed here, are intended to convey that what Du Bois perceived in 1926 is as palpable now in an era in an era of what we refer to as postmodern, and sometimes by my brethren, post-black, who are exhausted from camping at the bottom of the racial mountain. Additionally, given that this is the 70th and 60th anniversaries of the founding of the university's permanent collection and unveiling of the mural, it is only fitting to reflect on the development of this collection in the context of this debate. To produce art solely to elevate the psychological position of Africans in the Americas, or to only endeavor to satisfy one's personal indulgences in the creative process. The criteria of Negro art was intended to underscore, or is intended to underscore, the value of creative production across disciplines in securing and augmenting the identity of African Americans, which Du Bois deemed to be at risk given our beleaguered history. Realizing that some audience members attending the annual NAACP event might perceive the subject extraneous to the occasion, Du Bois justified the topic within the realm of gazing beyond the historical documentation of the social evolution of the post-enslaved Negro that both he and Woodson so eloquently elucidated. However, in reviewing some of the essays published during the Harlem Renaissance, Du Bois's discourse seems likely a response to an impassioned racial conversation of the period. It followed Alain Locke's 1925 anthology, The New Negro, which prescribed a direction that black artists should take in expressing their art forms, looking back to their ancestral origins to develop work that spoke to their ethnicity and spiritual artistic freedom. And here we have images of Alain Locke, George Schuler with his wife and daughter, Langston Hughes, W.E.B. Du Bois, and of course, Hale Woodruff. It is important to note that stereotypes of black Americans were rampant through the media at this time. And it was also a period, it was in contrast to some of the portraits that were being generated at the time as well. And unfortunately, I don't have as many. I think not where it's supposed to be. That's where it's supposed to be. This portrait by Laura Wheeler Waring in 1927. 2 years later, however, in 1926, the notorious dissenting journalist George Schuler published in The Nation the polemic editorial, The Negro Art Hokum, arguing that black artists had no viable history from which to draw and create artifacts as influential as their ancestors. At best, Schuler declared, it is a desperate fantasy to recapture an identity lost in time through the acculturative process. 2 months later, Langston Hughes countered in his seminal essay, The Negro and the Racial Mountain, debunking Schuler's contention, stating, the Negro artist works against an undertow of sharp criticism and understanding from his own group and unintentional bribes from the whites. Thus it appears Du Bois chose this occasion to orate his perspective on the subject. At the outside, Du Bois ruminates over what the black race will do after achieving its deepest wish to become privileged Americans. And I quote, we want to be Americans, full-fledged Americans, with all the rights of other Americans. But is that all? Do we want simply to be Americans? If tonight suddenly you should become full-fledged Americans, if your color faded, or if the color line here in Chicago was miraculously forgotten, suppose too you became at the same time rich and powerful, what is it that you would want? What would you immediately seek? Would you buy the most elaborate estate on the North Shore? Would you be a Rotarian or a lion or a whatnot of the very last degree? Would you wear the most striking clothes, give the richest dinners, and buy the longest press notices? And some of the images that I'm showing here, this is by Sheila P. Bright from her Suburbia series, where she was actually exploring some of these parallels in how African Americans have assumed their place in a privileged class. After acquiring all the creature comforts and accessories of a privileged class, exactly what would we want? Advocating that African Americans should seek whatever he preferred to as beauty, truth, and goodness, a romance, or what I interpret as a rapture, because as I was reading these words, I was really trying to put them in the context of of what we would be calling that today. what I interpret as a rapture within their identity, a way to assuage their besieged souls. That this dynamic discourse among these race leaders took place during the height of the Harlem Renaissance seems logical given the surge of representational works by black artists who were intent on prevailing upon the backdrop of derisive and contemptuous stereotypical images of African Americans flooding the media. Time is moving, isn't it? Let me see. I want to move on to this place with our dear Woodruffs. So let me just say this. Du Bois bemoaned African Americans' proclivity to acquiesce to the opinion of their oppressors, stating that if a colored person created it, then it must be of inferior quality. As it is now, we are handing everything over to a white jury. If a colored man wants to publish a book, he has to go to get a white publisher and a white newspaper to say it's great. And then you and I say so.
So true.
Go ahead.
So the Harmon Foundation in 1927, in its effort to provide a venue for black artists, unwittingly perpetuated this notion. This posture was equally present in the famed Atlanta University National Juried Exhibitions for Negro Artists of America, where for 29 years, some 887 artists sent their works to this institution. The jurors were either all or predominantly white until the very last year, 1970. Oof, 1 minute. Do I need to, this is a long paper, okay. So I'm gonna move on to this part about Mr. Woodruff. What I actually discovered, which is really quite intriguing. Du Bois, who returned to Atlanta University, I'm just going to jump here. Du Bois, who returned to AU in 1933. Woodruff joined the faculty in 1931. And at that time, with this debate going on, Woodruff wrote an article in Spelman Messenger, The Negro and Art, in which he questions why must the art of the Negro be confined to subjects negroid. The mad demand on Negro artists is that they contribute to their folk art. He counters, Woodruff goes on to say, this does not apply to white artists. Woodruff asserted that they plunder, pillage, and exploit all subjects in the life of the Negro for inspiration. The soul of the Negro, no longer under the spiritual anguish produced by slavery, has reacted to his environment in a way that renders his once fertile, sensitive soul impotent and sterile. And so I give you this, I'm just going to cut to the murals really quickly, because what I discovered, which is very interesting, is that the murals essentially really speak to this debate that was going on. And in this particular image, and I've really jumped, this is the 4th image in the series, Dissipation, which is all about colonization, where he discusses this idea of this work, our work being plundered and taken and also used by the European artists to essentially create what we now know as modern art. And so he was really challenging this idea that, why are we being restricted to only looking at our culture, and let me go forward to and I'm really doing it a little backwards, but native forms. While he was still opposing certain ideas, to me the sense of double consciousness is very present, particularly when you look at native forms, where he's saying, well, this is where we come. We do have a very strong ancestral history that we can, make more global statements. At any rate, I feel like I'm running out. I know I've run out of time, and this is really a quite a profound finding, I think, about all of the entire series. And so I'm going to close by saying my last statement here, which is a Du Bois quote from Strivings of the Negro People. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose darkest strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. He would not Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world as Africa. He would not bleach his Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that the Negro blood has a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be a Negro and an American without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face. And so on the May 6th, we are going to launch the book that we have. This is really interesting. Again, we have the Muses, which represents, this comes from the last mural, the Muses. On May 6th, 2 o'clock, we have Janetta Cole, Dr. Janetta Cole, who is now the director of the National Museum of African Art, the Smithsonian. She is going to keynote the address. And this book will be available on that day. All right, thank you very much. Shut down.
Yeah, and it'll shut off. Dr. Black, are you in?
You know what?
Just close it.
I'm not sure how.